Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Quick Connect Live. So in Quick Connect Live, it's collaboration between Strengths Alchemy, Center for Cybersecurity. Don't know what Ethan wants to call himself. It changes every time. And Jeff. So last round, we spoke about the shadow selves, the shadow self.
Shallow self.
Shadow self. And don't like that. I need to drink water. Okay, so we talked about the shadow self. We explored what it was, where it came from, the imprinting from parents, how it kind of informs us in terms of what we give permission for or not. We also talked about what are some ways that we can deal with it, right? Increasing self-awareness, journaling, talking to ourselves, recording ourselves, and things like that. So that was also done in Miro. So if you were there last round, you have access to the PDF of Miro. If not, let me know. We'll send it over to you. And today we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to start Miro up, and then we're just going to live write everything so we can all change things along the way.
Yep.
So we will also put the link there. It's already there. In case you want, I can kind of re-put it there.
Yeah, because not everybody will have seen it.
Yeah. So this is the link to Miro. So if you can click on that link, later you can click on it now and go in first. That's fine. What we will do is we'll use that and we will play around, kind of, right? So Ethan, I'll hand it over to you to kickstart.
I thought the host would go around with, would you like to introduce yourself so that everybody knows who you are?
But I'm not the host, right? I'm the Miro body.
Oh yeah, so that I'm because I'm managing the session, so let me hand it over to Jeffeth to ask everybody to introduce themselves.
Okay, then I'll do the host. Okay, so maybe just introduce who you are. I mean, for those of you, for people who are new to here, as well as people who are seasoned. And then also maybe since it's part 2, maybe we can start a question like, what are you keen to find out about shadow self? Okay, so first question, introduce yourself. Then second question is, what are you keen to find out? Okay, so maybe I'll start off with maybe we can go with Faith. Faith, are you okay to start first?
So yeah, hi, my name is Faith. I just started this group like this year. Service development manager into product and services. What am I keen to find out about shadow self? It's more about is there any way to, logically we know we have a shadow self, but is there a much more accurate test to help us to identify what they are besides using the anagram? Yeah, something like that.
Thanks, Faith. So around, is there a way to find out more about using some kind of tool?
Yeah, to identify the different aspect of shadow self.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of hidden parts after all.
Okay, thanks, Faith. Maybe proceed to Lynn.
Hello, I'm Lynn. I used to join the Strengths Finder group, I think a few years ago, kind of gave a stop to that. And recently I saw a topic, again, Meetup became very popular recently. So I saw this topic on shadow self. I'm sorry I didn't attend the first part, but I'm very interested in what's happening in the second part. I did a bit of reading before I joined this call, and I think it's about shadow self is that part of you. It's like a shadow, right? It's part of you. But the question is like, how do you manage it? And then I'm just hoping that the shadow self isn't something that becomes something that will self-sabotage me in certain situations in life. So it's good to know what that is and learn to manage and contain that.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank
so
you.
It's about how to manage it and not lead to self-sabotage. All right, thank you. Shall we move on to maybe Joanna?
Hello, Joanna here. I'm currently I'm in the learning and development space. For me, what I'm interested for the shadow self, I think it's something similar to what Lynn was interested in. It's about after we identify about ourselves, how do we work with it, or how do we integrate it into ourselves better?
Okay, thanks, Joanna. Because you've been through the first part, right? So now it's the moving on. What's next? Okay, thanks, Joanna. Let's move to Ken. I know you're invited, probably by Ethan.
No, he actually didn't invite me. Okay. So my name is Ken. As you guys have known, I'm Ethan's business partner in Center for Cybersecurity. So basically, I think I'll be more interested in actually find out the different kind of situations or triggers that actually provoke the shadow self to be materialized itself. Because like when you actually find out what are the triggers, probably you can pay a better consciousness to when do they appear or how they appear in what ways and so on and so forth.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Finding out about different triggers that will sort of elicit the shadow self, right? Okay, great. Shall we hear from Che?
Good morning. I'm Cher. I have been with this group following along for almost a year, maybe, I feel like. I am a coach as well as I do leadership development. And Shadow Self was a new thing for me to learn about with you all on the first part. And so I'm just looking to learn more about how to be more in tune and aware of it, as well as I think somebody already said it about managing it and not self-sabotage for self personally, but tell others.
Thank you, Che. Similar around managing it. Okay, and I saw that Lillian has also put in on the chat box. So she's interested because it's theory that she came across when she was studying youth work. So she would like to find out more about what you see, the iceberg, know more about self. So more about self-awareness and how to work with others. Maybe I'll invite next to Alex.
I'm busy typing.
Still introduce yourself while you type.
Do you have to type out what your introduction?
Yes, I'll do that too. No, just kidding. Hi, everyone. So Alex, I run Strengths Alchemy, whereby I train and coach people with Strengths Finder, Lego Serious Play, and things like that. So on my full-time job, I also do workplace experience. So I now do things like design thinking, human-centered design with my team. So that's what's interesting for me right now. And in today's session, I'm going to be your Miro board master. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take down as much as possible your inputs. And of course, along the way, if there's opportunity, you can also get on the board. You can type in, you can edit. And I see Lynn has gone to the post-it notes and put a thumbs up on one of it. So feel free to interact with the board as much as possible, because that's what's going to make the session more interactive and more engaging, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to introduce myself, then I'll hand over to Ethan, then he will introduce and he'll start off. So I'm Jafford, I'm a civil servant. So I'm also a L&D specialist in Civil Service College. I mean, how this whole shadow self started about was a casual conversation I had with Ethan, and I read up some part about shadow self and I was interested and asked Ethan, and Ethan told me that, wow, he was really doing in-depth research in this whole area for the last couple of years. So I thought, wow, cool, isn't that a cool topic just to kickstart and exploit? And there we have it. Here we are, just having a conversation and a quick connect on shadow self. So with that, I'll hand over to Ethan, who probably has captured all the questions, and he'll introduce himself. Ethan, please.
Yeah, hi, everybody. So the reason why I put Center for Cybersecurity versus the usual one, which is the Office Matters, is because this is my current project. I'm a person who's very passionate about manpower, skills, learning, and all this kind of stuff. Center for Cybersecurity was a kind of a company that became orphaned because of some issues. And then I took over the reins and then started like falling in love with this industry. But because it's the best opportunity for me to really create the manpower aspects of things. So like this is where my real interest is in, right? Developing people, understanding things. And cybersecurity is a growing scene, which is why I'm focusing a lot on it. But my real background comes from my history in medicine. I was studying psychiatry. I was really interested in mental health. I've always been in this area for a very long time. So it's shadow self itself, I would say it's only about 5-6 years worth of work. But in terms of personal development and all these kind of different things, it's been 16 years in the making. So I started very young because I actually have mild Asperger's, which was very, very lately diagnosed only when I was 28, 29. And I've learned how to manage and cope with it. And this is where talking about shadow self comes in very useful also, because a lot of times we don't really recognize what shadow selves are. So let me just recap that a little bit more from last week. 2 weeks ago what shadow self is really about. So is this part of ourselves that we suppress? It is this part of ourselves that we don't allow ourselves to view and show other people. So that's a very key part of this. Why is this very important? Behind all the reason why we have a shadow self is because a lot of us have parts of us that we are not proud of. Who here has parts of you that you know? Who here is super transparent and tell everybody everything about yourself? No, right? Right, precisely. So if there's any part of yourself that you cannot show to other people, there is a chance, right, that it can be a shadow self. And I drew these 3 rings to explain a little bit more about that. So when we talk about shadow self, there's the first is there's the self in the center of all of this. So when I talk about the self, it's your way of thinking, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. So when I talk about the self, it always goes back to this feeling where how many of you have thoughts of stabbing somebody before? I mean, I'm just saying this not in a not like a you actually want to do it, but you just feel like stabbing somebody. Or if anybody watched Ally McBeal, this is betraying our age also. Like Ally McBeal had all these scenes of the person's head exploding, or all these kind of different things in the show. Or you have all this kind of stuff. You have these thoughts about people or situations that you have, and you feel, you feel angry, you feel unhappy, you feel like whacking somebody for it. And this is what comes up, right? So this part, if you suppress yourself and you judge yourself, it creates this shadow self. And let me move to the next part of this thing. It's called the disallowance. So this is why we go back to the term called you don't like it, you are suppressing it. So if you notice, what most people do is that instead of bringing it on, so last time I talked about the Johari window, what other people notice of you. If you're triggered by something, you start acting unconsciously. You don't know what's coming out. It just comes out. And then you start going, oh no, oh no, oh no. And then you go into guilt complex. So this is evolving that conversation a bit more. So this is where after you've journal about yourself and your day and realize that, you know what, I don't like this about myself. I don't like this person, right? And you try to ignore or suppress that person. So sometimes if somebody gives you a feedback, that you tend to be a very angry person. Jeffers' story, right? Jeffers' story was like, he doesn't recognize that he was being angry while telling his kids not to be angry. That was a story that Jeffers shared that a lot of people related to, right? A lot of times we are not aware of that part of ourselves. Why? Because we are disallowing ourselves to see it. So there are a lot of processes in our minds where we are not allowed to see something. Yeah, and I'm happy for Alex to continue writing on this. Then the last part about this is why the shadow self stays powerful is this other word called coping. So when we talk about management of the shadow self, right? 2 weeks ago, we talked about the shadow self itself. Why is it not useful? How does it hurt you? All these kind of different things. Then let's add on the last layer about this, which is how the shadow self creates coping mechanisms that you might actually be proud of that traps you in the cycle of using your shadow self actively without recognizing you are destroying yourself. And that's why managing it is very key. So when we look at our strengths, right? When you look at the strengths list right next to us, all of us have strengths that we are proud of, that we might say, okay, me and Alex know this person who takes pride in her empathy, but has a tendency, but might have a problem of doing it too much to the level that she mirrors the person's negative emotions back and starts creating arguments. So it's not her fault, but it is her shadow self because your coping mechanism became your strength. It's her coping mechanism in her upbringing that leads to her feeling it's a good thing that I'm empathetic so I can feel the other person's emotions. And it is a strength to me. But we don't recognize how it jeopardizes relationships because if I mirror back a person's negative emotions, what happens? It spirals, it starts getting worse and worse and worse. So this is where I want to invite everybody to think about, is there an aspect of your life where you are proud of it, but you're not always sure that it's the most useful thing that you can have? So if I may start with Alex, as you're writing this, right after you're writing this, I just want your thoughts on this. so that you can keep track of other people's.
Okay, question again.
So like this aspect of something you're proud of that actually ended up hurting you at the end of the day.
Something that I'm proud of, I think it's also empathy, right? So I do take pride in my ability to kind of sense what people are feeling and doing. So I remember this time I was in uni, right? We had this friend, we were kayaking, and so it was raining. So the group kind of made a decision to like take a break somewhere. We went to this friend of ours and we told him. His face immediately turned black, and nobody knew. But I ventured a guess that he was upset we made the decision without him. At least he thought we made the decision without him, right? So we kind of went to him and said, hey, look, because he's the lead for the expedition, and we're like, hey, look, we think it's raining. Shall we stop, because the storm is coming? So he took it that we decided among ourselves without him and then told him what we wanted. So he got really pissed off. The interesting thing is nobody knew why he was pissed off except me. So I was like, guys, I'm thinking maybe he's pissed off about that. So we went off when we went to shore, we were kayaking. And we confirmed he said he was really pissed off about that. And then of course we resolved it. People went, no, I wasn't trying to do that. The girls were crying, and things like that. So that's the beautiful part of empathy, right? The ability to kind of sense and know probably where's people coming from. And that's also my individualization. Now, the dangerous part about empathy is, of course, I'm learning. Empathy, we talk about the ability to feel what other people are feeling. Now, if we don't manage that very well, that becomes enmeshment, whereby we not able to separate what we feel against other people. And that can actually cause a lot of negative impact in the way that we deal, the way that we relate to people and things like that. So for me, that's how I'm kind of proud of empathy, my ability to read people, but also there's this unhealthy part, right, of how empathy can show up if I don't manage it well. So, yep.
So let me add on to what you just talked about, right? So when it becomes enmeshment or somebody starts encroaching into your territory, but you have to empathize with them, that becomes really bad for you. Is that true?
Yes, it does. And then I need to learn how to redraw boundaries and stuff.
So the thing about this is that because a lot of us learn most of our strengths through coping at childhood first, and then we have to learn how to manage it in the long run. But whenever it starts overlapping other versions of ourselves, meaning you have this, right? You have this bunch. So if we're talking about one part of self, and let's talk about this being empathy. So I'm going to use this example. But then when you have a defense where you need to defend yourself, where you need to protect yourself and take care of yourself, when these two clash, and what happens is that because, for example, you're not allowed to be not empathetic, and then you're not allowed to be not defending yourself, when do you choose? What do you choose? And this creates, these two shadow selves starts conflicting with each other. And it creates a secondary reaction that you start either enmeshing with the other person, which happens, or you start having to overreact in certain manners. Okay, when I talk about this, it's also like, so our parents, okay, this is Asian culture. Our parents like to cross our boundaries a lot. In Asian culture, our parents like to cross our boundaries a lot. But so even if we try to defend our territory and boundaries, our empathy would create a problem later on. Because they will start feeling, oh no, I made my parents feel bad about crossing my boundary, or certain things like this. And this creates enmeshment, right? So I'll use the term that you are talking about. It creates a secondary reaction and you get fixed into that mode. This is how self-sabotage happens when we use shadow selves. Because shadow selves can be effective and usable and functional. The reason why it is a shadow self is because we cannot actively and consciously choose when to use it and when not to use it. I will always be empathetic is like Alex's typical way last time, right? Like because previously when me and Alex were talking about an issue with Godson, and then his empathy kicked in really strong. And I was like, you need to draw your boundaries. And then he went, but cannot. And that's when the enmeshment appears. All this kind of thing starts appearing because it is not a choice. Whenever it's a shadow self, it is not a choice. You will automatically fall into it and your logic will tell you you're being a bad person, you're not empathetic enough, You're not allowed to be not empathetic. So your strength becomes your weakness. Because what if there's a person who's trying to harm you and you try to empathize with them? That's when the conflict starts appearing and you start having issues to come along the way. So whenever we talk about when self-sabotage happens, it's not within one single shadow self. It is usually between different characters, different parties. And then when all the triggers are being triggered at the same time, and you don't know how to choose because all are fixed. All the rules are fixed. They're all existing all at the same time. It creates this reaction in our minds, and it causes us to get really stressed out. I use the word disallowance. I would say it's called rules. I'll go like hard and fast rules, things that are fixed. Or another word you can call it, it's called fixation. So it becomes something that you're fixated on, or you're too into. Like, you know, I'm pretty sure you have met people who are way into the rules. They're like even if the rules are meant to need to be broken at this moment, they will still stick by the rule, right? They'll still follow 1, 2, 3, 4, even if you need to go straight to 4. Those people are fixated in the processes and they refuse to change and adapt, not because they want to, but because in their minds, they're not allowed to break the rules. And this is actually what the shadow self does. It stops you from opening your ability to look at other opportunities. You fixate towards certain factors that are more important than the rest. So this is why shadow self is harmful. Not because within itself, on its own, it is not. It is when you're in a situation when you have to choose that shadow selves can start conflicting. You start going into paralysis. You start choosing the wrong things because it fixes you in a certain direction. Yeah. So this is a little bit more complicated than simply just recognizing a shadow self when you get triggered. This is why because the word that people kept on using the other just now was self-sabotage. So I'm just going to use that word a little bit more and fix on what is it that creates the self-sabotage. It is not the shadow self that creates the self-sabotage. It is an interaction of the shadow self with the current situation that makes you choose an option that is not good for you. It can come from a conflict between two shadow selves or multiple shadow selves, depending on the situation, where you have to handle multiple factors, handle multiple situations. Or it can be due to the fact that you are so fixated on one thing that you cannot look at the other options available to choose a better choice. Let me just let this sink in for a while, and any questions so far?
So Ethan, maybe I ask a question. Because I think in strengths you got because Alex used his strengths, so that's one is empathy, right? So is this something to do with the balcony and basement? So like, how do I then tell whether I am using my strength or am I leading into the shadows? Is that how you see it? I'm not sure.
I love it
Yeah.
because this goes back to the term called maturity. To me, when Alex uses the term maturity, balcony and basement is using it using it effectively. The maturity is what decides whether you can use it at the right time, whether you're having open to options, whether is it something that you're always flexing even when you don't have to. So because when we talk about maturity of people, right? When you talk about a person's maturity, you're also looking at whether they are doing the right thing at the right time rather than just whether they're strong or effective or technically strong. Maturity is about when to say the right thing, how to say the right thing, whether you're doing it in the right moment, how are you managing a situation. So I go back to when Alex talks about maturity in strengths, this is exactly what relates back to the shadow self. So there's nothing wrong with the shadow self if you have resolved it to the level it stops being a shadow self. You stop being fixated. You start using coping mechanisms to work around it. But you actually are able to say that the reason why I choose empathy at this moment is because I'm in a position of power, or I'm in a position to show empathy to be able to fix the problem. Sometimes showing empathy is not the way to fix the problem. Sometimes you need to get a person to recognize certain things, right? Because sometimes when I'm too empathetic with the person, I explain for the person, but not actually solving the problem, and sitting there and just swallowing the emotions together with the person is not going to solve the problem. But I'm being empathetic, right? Like that's what a person who's fixated on the idea of being empathetic would say. But the key part here is, are you solving the problem? Are you mature enough to go away from your empathy at this moment, fix the problem, and come back to be empathetic?
Actually, I think what you say kind of makes sense, right? In the sense that, so I've kind of changed the words a little bit, right?
Great.
In the Clifton Strengths language, we call it talents, where talents are your natural recurring patterns of thinking, feeling, or behaving. So it's kind of innate, right? It happens to you naturally. And in some ways, I guess you could say that it might develop as part of coping mechanism, might develop part of, just nurturing, whatever nurturing means. So the talents are just that, right? Your patterns. And when you talk about raw, when it's used negatively, used in the wrong time, the wrong context, in the wrong degree, then it can have a negative impact. And that's the exact definition of weakness, right? In Clifton Strengths. So Clifton Strengths defines weakness as this. Weakness is an absence or misapplication of talent, skill, or knowledge that causes problems for yourself or others.
Wow.
Right? So we kind of integrate what they just said using strengths language and then using the strengths terminology.
So actually talking about that, right, to answer Faye's question, how do you discover your shadow self? Your strengths or your talents are actually your shadow selves. And how you use it defines whether is it effective or not. Like, so for example, right, maturity, as we use the word maturity is the process where you know when to use it, how to use it. Shadow self is the part that you don't want to see, you don't want to recognize. So for example, right, I use the word talents as in the opposite of empathy is your shadow self for Alex. So apathy or the lack of, so like when I talk about this, it's like when you're fixated on empathy, the part you're not allowed to be is apathy, like the lack of connecting with the person or choosing to be objective in the situation and ignore the person's emotions.
But that is provided your strength is at the basement.
Yes, so I'm saying that that's how most strengths are formed. Like from what I recognize from a lot. Okay, so the reason why a lot of us think the certain way that we do is we have matured from a shadow self and accepted self later on. We can do that later on. So maybe a lot of you have already healed them or integrated them into your life. And therefore it is a strength. But in terms of talents, usually the opposite version is usually the part that you always hide. So if Alex doesn't give a crap about a person, so something that's really interesting. Sorry, Alex, I'm gonna pauto you here a little bit, but this is not a very big one. So for example, Alex, my other business partner, James, has said that Alex has a tendency to ignore people without knowing that he's ignoring people. So he might be high empathy, but he has actually an apathetic side that appears from time to time. And I've seen it happen. It's not a bad thing. It's just what it is. He does ignore certain people when he's excited in one direction or he's empathizing with one person. So he's not empathizing with the whole room, but he does not recognize it. But the thing is that it's for within us, we're very comfortable with saying, okay, it's just because he's distracted. However, it is a form of him that, for example, why I don't mention it all the time is because I don't think it's a shadow self that he is worth him dealing with right now, right? But it's a part of him that he will never want to see of himself, like an apathetic version of Alex. Would you ever say they're apathetic, Alex?
Depends on context, right?
Would you ever be saying that it's okay that I'm apathetic to a person's emotions?
I don't like the person, yes.
Great. So, but
if someone that I care about, right, someone that's close to me, that whose relationship I value, then no lah, right? But if it's someone that I kind of maybe work with but don't like, and the person is pissed off at me because I did something he doesn't like, then too bad.
What if the person you care about is getting angry over something absolutely trivial?
I would, yeah, probably not be empathetic.
Yes. Do you recognize when you're like starting to lose? Okay, so this is where feedback comes in very useful. There are moments where Alex is a little bit apathetic even towards me, not against you, but because some of the problems I face are different from his. And I'm okay with it because we're friends and I can recognize it and I work with it. But it's something that I recognize is a shadow part of himself that he doesn't have to work on today because it's not something that is absolutely a priority because it's not relevant for today, for example. So these are what I term as shadow selves. Sorry, as you use it as an example, Alex, but it is absolutely something that like I notice everybody's shadow self, just to let you know, right? Because I notice when people ignore themselves and they have micro expressions, they go like little smile here, little bit of the in their faces because they might have a certain reaction, but they might not recognize that they're doing it. And if I call it out, they might not ever admit to it because to them, that's not how they are as a person. They will never recognize it. But very often, they are the opposite of the strengths that you're most proud of.
So I guess what you're saying is that if there is a reason we can't not be something, that might be indication of it being a shadow self.
Yes. There is a good chance there is. So remember what I told you called anti-values last time? That's a shadow self concept. So
what if someone kind of has like the value of, I don't know, compassion, right? So if I were to apply that same logic, then it's like the person can't be not compassionate.
Yes. So okay, have you met those people who are compassionate and always complain about rich people and complain about how the system is screwed up and how all these kind of different things because they're very compassionate. They look at the people on the ground, but they show no compassion towards the people on the top. They cannot recognize they lack compassion for the people who are rich, who are powerful, who are successful.
But we've also seen people who have compassion for even those groups, right?
Yeah, no, okay. If those people who are able to do this have managed themselves, have moved past their shadow selves. But for most people, if they say, I value my compassion, they don't recognize when they're being not compassionate to certain groups of people. Like, Alex, you're a very empathetic person, but if you don't like the person, you're perfectly fine being empathetic with the person. So are you an empathetic person?
Selectively empathetic. No, I guess I choose not to be empathetic with certain people.
Great. So that's a choice. Then it's not that you're not allowed to be like, so then if you say, no, I'm empathetic to everybody, then you're definitely lying to yourself and you're not mature about the way you look at your empathy.
I mean, okay, so like, let's say I work with someone, right? I kind of know he's upset. I kind of know why he's frustrated. I disagree with why he's frustrated because our viewpoints are different. And so I go like, yeah, I can see you're frustrated, but well, it is what it is, right? We see things differently. We manage things differently, right? I'm in a role whereby I can manage it and influence people in certain ways to that. So then I can acknowledge that, you may not be happy, but
so I like this. Okay, so this is the part of you, right? So last year, when there were points in time where I told you that you were being apathetic about certain things at work or certain things in certain manners, you were resisting at first. We had conversations around this. So for me, it's mostly resolved. So whenever you give, we have this example, like because it's an ongoing topic that we had since last year. So I've noticed that you have changed the way you approached it, particularly the person that you are very unhappy with.
More mature.
You are a lot more mature in the way you are handling it because of that. So it's not that I'm any better. I just happen to be able to reflect it. We have a great conversation about it. He's able to observe it and we're able to move on from it.
Okay, so if I were to summarize what you just said, or rather condense what you just said with regards to moving past the shadow self, it would be this, right? You have moved past your shadow self if you're able to acknowledge or see when you are behaving in a way contrary to who you thought you were. Okay, that's really convoluted way of saying it. Can someone help me put it into better words?
Anybody wants to try? Share the way of looking at your way of looking at it, even. I would love to hear Joanna's thoughts because you studied psychology and everything. So
Yeah, but I'm not very sure. Like, I guess, like if you put a different way for what Alex said, right? Once you move past the shadow, once you can acknowledge it, you have moved past it. So in a way, it's like when you finally acknowledge it in the sense of like shedding some light on it, then it is no longer a shadow, like it's no longer in the shadows. But I have a question about this, right? So like, for example, if we go back to the example of compassionate people who are very compassionate about those like at the bottom, but not for those at the top. So if they say someone does not acknowledge that they don't have compassion for the people at the top, that in the shadow self, but if someone says and they acknowledge that they don't have compassion for people at the top, but they have compassion for people at the bottom, that means that it's no longer like the shadow self.
It's no longer a shadow self. Then they start recognizing that they are choosing who they are choosing to be compassionate with. They are making a choice. They're not compassionate people by identity. They are compassionate with the certain groups of people that they can relate to.
If they happen to say like, I know that I'm not compassionate for people at the top, and that's because they don't deserve compassion, does that mean that they are still in the shadow self?
Okay, so this is another set of the shadow self. So my favorite part about this is that what if you are one of the people at the top? Would you be compassionate towards yourself? This is when the question comes in. So when we talk about this, it's because shadow selves is because situations are needed in order for your shadow self to appear. Does this make sense? If you're happily in your comfort zone, would you see your shadow self? You wouldn't. It's the same as, like the example of racism. Most people don't recognize that they're apathetic towards people of other races, particularly the ones that their culture doesn't believe is at the same level due to, systemic issues. Because, and then if you tell them that they're racist, what's the first reaction?
I'm not.
I'm not. No, I'm not. Okay. The day that they recognize the other bunch of people are lower class to them, which is actually genuinely a lot of racism taking place, right? It's a lot of underpinning assumptions about certain races, which is a real situation. Then they shed light on their shadow self. It doesn't mean it is completely resolved, but at least there's some light on it. It doesn't go into the full details of this because, again, then you're talking about your privilege as a person who's born in your particular race, in your particular country, in your particular social status, for you to say this about the other people. What if you lose all of that? Then you have no empathy for the other person. You have no capabilities of judging the other person. So then once we actually shed light on a lot of our shadow selves, very often, if you're actually really staring at it hard, you will actually eventually lose it because you start showing actual compassion or actual empathy because you start recognizing that a lot of the assumptions that are underneath. So when we go back to these circles, right? Capitalism is a form of, we're believing that hard work is beyond, okay, there's an assumption that a lot of people have, which I was very unhappy with one of our ministers saying this. I work hard, I make good money, then I have more money in MediSave, I can take care of myself when I fall ill. I don't work hard, I don't have much money, then I don't have much money in MediSave, so I cannot take care of myself. I'm like, that's not the only two binary answers, right? That's complete lack of empathy. There's a correlation between working hard and making money in the eyes of a lot of people. But what happens is that the assumption that because I'm poor, it means I'm not working hard enough, or because he's poor, therefore he's not working hard enough, is a form of our shadow self projecting upon another person. We're actually anti-poverty. We're not anti-laziness, we're anti-poverty. We're even linking, we're actually saying that a poor person is their fault, is a problem. So these are the shadow selves acting up in that process. So
Ethan, maybe I'll Maybe I just want to ask, maybe I can also share from my point of view, because I just want to ask, is there like a simpler way of how we can identify it within ourselves? And I think you saw my top 5, right? So responsibility is one of them. So I do notice it became my own strength and sometimes also my own weakness. So the parts where it was very strength, people will say I'm very dependable because I tend to follow up once I commit to things, right? So once I commit to you a timeline, I will deliver it. And I tend to deliver it on the same timeline in which I committed. And that comes out as my strength. Now, then the part where I notice more and more where I feel really burnt out or it's a misapplication of responsibility is it's really hard to say no to someone. But I guess the epiphany that got to me was the very fact that I realized it didn't seem to be a problem for somebody else.
Tell me more. Can you explain a bit more?
So meaning that somebody else seems to be able to say no, and it's okay for them to say no, but it seems to be a really solid problem in my head. So it became a question that am I overreacting, or am I making it bigger than what it really is? The situation really is. So
I love your statements. Yeah, I love what I just asked. So let me just give back to.
Yeah.
I have this wait, oh my gosh, this is not working out. Let me just bring Alex to me. Oh no.
What do you want to do?
No, actually, if you can just look here. This is actually the process I always recommend people to go through. To find your shadow self and then to fix it. So it's called R square rent. It's just basically rent. So, and fix it. So what you just described is beautiful, because when you said it, I was about to go there eventually, but like when I was trying to get people to understand this, you remember talk about like express yourself, find out exactly what you're feeling, right? Journal it, speak into your author.ai, figure out what you're feeling. That's where the reflection process starts beginning. A lot of people don't recognize that you cannot reflect unless you rent. Yes, yeah, Faith. The different ways of identify, right? Renting is the first step. So this is why it's also really important, because when I talk about your strengths, for example, if Jeffert, you were to say, I'm such a responsible person, I shouldn't be saying no to people, and you keep on saying that over and over again, right? You're like anti-no, right? So I will use it as an cannot say no to other people, anti-no. Then when you analyze it, you went, hey, wait, is this hurting me? Then when you see somebody else, yes, if the person cannot rent and express themselves, even in a journal, even in a private journal where they're writing to themselves, that means they're even creating lack of safety for themselves. Therefore, they cannot rent. Then you can get a new perspective, only because you start recognizing that it's a problem that you cannot say no. When you identify it as a problem, so analysis grounds is you need to recognize unless you fully recognize that it's a problem. So in motivational interview in psychotherapy, they always talk about this. Motivational interview is a way of getting people out of addictions. Until the person sees that it's a problem, it's not a problem to him. So nobody wants to change and nobody wants to get rid of their shadow selves until they see it's a problem. Does that make sense? So I will never want to change you or Alex because A, you're my friends. The other part is my wish is never to get you to change, because only when you want to change, then you will change. And the only way for you to change is when you recognize it as a problem. That's why I start with renting. Bring out your shadow self, bring out all your judgments, bring out all the things that you have, right? I don't like it that this person is not responsible. I don't like it that the person says no to me. I don't like it when da. So when you have all these thoughts, then you start recognizing where all your rules and regulations are. That's when you start asking yourself, is this what I want? Is this who I want to be? That's when I love it when you ask the question, when you have a person, when you see how other people can say no, it gives you this, wait, there's a possibility, there's a chance for me to say no. Because I'm pretty sure people have said no to you before you had this realization.
Yeah. So I guess then that goes before this, right? Which is even to recognize it, right? I mean, that self-awareness to recognize, because I guess then it really, because I keep thinking it's a problem that I keep thinking that everybody has that difficulty. You know what it means, right? Until you realize you speak to someone else, like it seems like people can set perfect boundaries and it's easy for them to say no. Then you start to wonder whether that problem you think is true for everyone.
Exactly.
There's
And
also the possibility that you judge the people who don't do it, right? So I know people with responsibility, while they don't say no, they're really proud of it, and they can be quite judgmental of people who don't take the responsibility that the people with responsibility take.
exactly why I say your strength can be also your shadow self. Because it's a result of your shadow self, your anti-irresponsibility. That means you're always looking out for how other people are irresponsible, how you're more responsible than them, and therefore I'm better than everybody else. And you never want to change.
Yeah. And I must say that the fact that I start to notice that everybody is different gives me comfort. Do not hold so tightly on my own responsibility and expectation of other people. That's my connectedness speaking, sorry.
No, I love it. I love how you talk about it. Okay, Lillian asked a wonderful question. Right? What if the individuals thinks that he's okay and does not want to change, but it's affecting himself and others? So this is where it's really, really key. So the only way for renting to reflect and to analyze what happened. When are we renting? When do we give ourselves the space to rent? Have you ever noticed, right? For some people, meeting new people is exciting for them because they can share all their stories without worrying about the person judging them. And then there are people who only talk to their closest friends and can rent non-stop and have that space to do so. And some people, no matter where they go, they cannot rent. So the key part about renting is listening. So, okay, so this is where the interesting part. In order for me to rent, somebody needs to listen. If I can listen to myself, great. If I can't listen to myself, I need a safe space created by somebody else. So this is why psychotherapy, coaching, and all these kind of things will become so essential for some people. Because that's the only safe space they have. Why is it so important? It's because most of us, if we feel like we have no space to rent and express ourselves, to see ourselves, we have no space to get to even reflection and analysis. So that's why if the person is unwilling to change and thinks that he's perfectly fine, it's because they haven't seen themselves and stared at themselves and looked at the effects of their behaviors on other people because they don't want to see it. They don't want to admit to it. Why? Because they don't have the safe space to unload it and really express their really discomfort with themselves. I've always asked, so there was this study about serial killers. How many serial killers think that they're actually doing evil? Not a single one. There's so part of this cybersecurity thing I was learning also about was because there's this bunch of cybersecurity experts who actually hack the scam callers from India or certain villages in India that are like specializing in scam calling people. So these guys actually set up a reverse back tracing, got back to the IP address, even know everything about this guy, and call that person and ask him, why are you doing this? Why are you scamming other people? The person says, it's either me or others. I'm not doing anything evil. I'm doing what the world will do to me anyway. Everybody who does what they do will find every rational reason to back up what they say, do, or think because of their shadow selves. I'm not allowed to see that I'm scamming somebody, that I'm hurting somebody else's family. I'm just protecting my family.
But that may not be true, right? Because in their worldview, it sounds like the person you just described has the worldview that the world is scammy. So he's just doing what the world is doing. So he may not be a denying that he's hurting other people. It's just an acknowledgement that, well, people hurt people, I'm just part of it.
Okay, so the other part about this is when they ask him, do you know you actually hurt this family? He's like, what? Really? What happened to the lady? Like that actually in that evolution of their conversation. it was interesting because then when he started recognizing that he's been actually hurting other people's families, he started having empathy because he chooses not to see and interact with those scenarios. He chooses not to see the impact of his actions. He chooses not to want to know what he's doing. Because his rationalization keeps screaming to him that you're doing this to protect your family. And that's what shadow selves do. We disallow ourselves to see reality as it is, whether is it good or bad, because we don't want to see certain parts of ourselves. That I'm a scam artist, that I'm hurting other people, that I have the capability of hurting somebody else, that I have the capability of being irresponsible. Jeffeth, we just want to question just because it goes back to your story, right? Did you think about whether you were angry yourself when you were telling your kids not to be angry?
I mean, before that, I didn't lah, but it's only after when I was aware. So before that, I was just thinking like, oh, I mean, it's more like, can you give me some peace and quiet? Because maybe my type 9, right? I love peacekeeping. So it also became part of my way of coping, which is when I hear loud noises or people screaming or my kids screaming, right? Sometimes it triggers me also. So when I say it, of course, I self-justify, right? Until I realize, hey, it's funny, I'm also very angry when I say it. So I ask them not to be angry, then I myself is angry. There's something that's not logical lah.
But why it irritates you is because you're anti-angry also.
Yeah, I'm also anti-angry, but it takes my wife to tell me lah. I mean, it was just a fleeting thought that I have, right? Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do it, that kind of thing next time. Until somebody pointed out to me like, hey, you notice yourself, you're really very angry every time you ask them not to be angry. Then that sort of, my wife told me that it sort of invite me to think about it, like, hey, am I really suppressing anger? Because so that's also one of the reasons why I went to go and read out on shadow self, like whether whether my own upbringing has led to me trying to suppress my other emotions of anger, and therefore I do appear calm in front of other people, but internally I'm just a very angry person.
There are signs of anger through like the biting of your buckle strength, which is how strong your cheeks are. All these kind of different things actually are signs of anger, but people don't really think about it because it's not something that we're trained to do. So yes, actually, you were always angry even when I met you all the way back, lah. But yeah, yeah, but no, but yeah.
I think back then when we met Jeffers, right, when he was still with a different group.
He who shall not be named, go on.
Then I think there was a bit more. I don't know whether it was anger, but there was a lot of thing. Can we say in Chinese, like a lot of thing 闷在? It's like
闷, which is simmering.
Internally, right?
What is simmering? Simmering is fire burning inside, right? That's anger, right? That's frustration. But then like the inability to express it and everything. But that's actually the beauty of this. There's nothing wrong with the shadow self. It's just what it is. It exists in all of us. We need the right people to reflect back to us so that we have the space to rant about it, to reflect upon it. Like your wife is a great reflector, right? For you, right? She reflects back to you so that you have the space to think about it. And the thing is that you're a great listener to yourself. You like to think about everything in your own world. So that's great because you need to have a person who can help you. So, and that's also part of the thing, because if you were not open to reflecting upon this or ranting about it to yourself, would you have been able to understand this, or would you just argue back to your wife?
I think if you told me when I'm calm, of course I'm good. When I'm very angry, when you tell me that, I'll brush it off lah. So I think the biggest thing, so the pattern I saw is when I was brought up, every time when I get angry, I'll talk back, right? So I get beat up, I get caned. So I was sort of taught like being angry was wrong.
That's disallowance.
Yeah. So what came to me is like when my kids get angry, I say the same thing to them: stop crying. then it's like then it just came upon me like, hey, I'm doing the same thing that someone else did to me. Then that became sort of the epiphany lah. Like,
Yes.
oh, I didn't realize. So it's a bit like you didn't want them to become that person that
You are acting like right
become
now.
somebody who have healthy emotions to express. I mean, in
Yeah.
that way, right? But I'm doing the same thing to deny them of that or to disallow them.
Absolutely. So that's why I use the word disallowance so much, because the word is always about the rules of not allowed to.
So disallowance, is it part of coping mechanisms and just trying to
No, it's replaces fixation. So fixation is the not allowed. I'm not allowed to do this, not allowed. So when I am okay, so what, for example, Alex, okay, I'm saying this about you, only because it's an easier example. When you are fixated on being empathetic, you're actually not allowing yourself to be apathetic towards people you care about.
That is true. It's very hard for me to be apathetic towards people I care about. There's
Yes.
just a complex equivalence to empathy and caring for someone.
Yes.
So it's hard for me to like, you care for someone and be empathetic at the same time. That doesn't connect for me.
I can. So that's the thing. I can. So like that's the difference, right? Like I recognize how to not be empathetic because the person doesn't need an empathy at that moment. There were a couple of people I literally had to scold so that they will be willing to listen. Not because I want to scold them, but that's what they respond to. I adjust accordingly and I individualize. So both of us got individualization. So I individualize to that level where I have to be strategic about talking to the person in such a way that they can receive the message in the fastest way possible. But it also helps that this self-assurance helps a lot.
Yeah, I have a lot of the relationship building talent teams, right? So the way that I do it tends to be, I can be a bit much when it comes to people that I care about.
Yep. So we have conversations around this, right? Like one of the major things about business is that when you start entering business, you start going into shady world, right? Because there's a lot of other things that you need to do, like befriend certain people. You know, have you ever heard like, business is all about connections, right? They like to say that, right? But then my favorite statement from one of my mentors is Derek Sivers, this like amazing like business guy. He said, "Why is that a problem?"
It's not.
Yeah, but when my mom or my dad talks about it, it's just about who you know. What's wrong with that? But it was always said as this thing where you cannot depend on your connections. You need to base on merit. You need to base it on this and that. But the thing is that connections is a large part of getting recognized, even getting to the right space, moving it forward. So for the longest time, I was anti-connections. I cannot use my connections at all. Even though I know the people who are in power, I cannot talk to them about what I'm doing. That's my shadow self. I was limiting my abilities to do business properly because I was stopping myself from actually having the right conversations. And that's actually part of the problem. That's one of the things that is very true for me. Bye, Joanna.
Bye, Joe.
So if you notice, right, like when we are talking about this, if you're talking about where to identify your shadow self, one of the major parts is what you're proud of. First up, so our strengths, what we look as our strengths, our talent themes, very often these are the opposite of what we don't like about ourselves and that we might suppress. So that's one clue. Second clue, what your Enneagram type really goes around. So maybe Palin, you can agree with Jeffeth about anger. Are you not allowed to be angry because you're also a type 9? Were you not allowed to be angry when you were younger?
I really cannot remember, but I don't remember having a lot of moments when I'm angry. So anger is a very foreign emotion. Till the point when I see other people angry, at the time when I didn't know I had angry as emotions, I will always be thinking that people are overreacting. which is not a good thing because I think it diminishes or invalidates their experience.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have no idea. At least Jeffrey could understand why he wasn't allowed to be angry, right? I can't even remember why.
Interesting.
I just remembered myself as a person who is generally quite calm. I don't have a lot of intense emotions.
Okay,
Yeah.
can I just share, right? Like there's was once you said it's either is like your calm, that explode. Was that something that you were describing previously? You have moments where you explode. Something about that previously where we were talking about this.
Why? I think it is possible. It's possible.
The
But
best
I would-
person to reflect
but
about this is
I
the
would
husband.
never like react in the moment. Like the explosion will not be against the person who offended me. It could be. I was telling Alex also, I think last Saturday, I was saying that sometimes it's a delayed response. So it was triggered earlier, but the reaction was delayed.
But so that's the thing. You're also not allowed to emotionally react to a situation.
Yeah, I don't like it. I prefer to respond.
So see that when you say that, right? There's this particular thing where there's this judgment towards people who react.
I don't judge other people, but I personally prefer not to.
Okay,
react.
so look at the way your face is crunching up and you're going, I don't really judge other people, but so
because
that
I
face,
don't like to be judgmental.
Okay,
I
so,
try not to.
So just so you know, right? that facial reaction, the micro expression,
okay.
It's actually one of disgust.
Yeah, because I don't think about myself. I really prefer not to judge people.
And it's perfect. Okay, so for me, it's so in my world, it is perfectly normal and acceptable for you to judge people, provided you don't hold on to it such that it affects your relationship. In my opinion, that's my world of looking at things, right? For example, just to give you an alternative. So I would immediately judge. Like I still remember how last Monday, something's happened. I was very unhappy. I knew part of the issue was me. But my first reaction, because of my upbringing, was to blame everyone else around me. So I was just blaming, because that's my shadow self when I was growing up. I had to learn to get rid of it eventually. So I had to like slowly learn how to get. But I allowed my shadow self to appear, speak its mind, rent it all out, reflect upon it. And thankfully, my girlfriend was very helpful in going through the process with me. And then I ended up with, actually, why am I blaming them? And then I went through the process of, okay, let me accept this part of myself again, because in this particularly stressful period, I got triggered because something failed, in my opinion, even though actually it turned out to be actually a very good process afterwards. But at that moment, I felt like a failure. Therefore, I blamed everybody else. So my shadow self was just spewing out like nobody's business. But the good part is I had the safe space to express it fully, so that I can manage it and just reflect upon it, look for new ways of looking at it. So that's why I don't mind judging even Ken, because I judge him all the time. But at the same time, I'm also always telling him, it's a judgment, but it only lasts for this long. It only lasts for this long. Sorry about it, but it just lasts this long, right? It's thank you, Lynn. It's all these little things that help, because the moment I let it out of my system, it allows me to then move on from that feeling. I'm not saying that it's wrong that you don't like judging and you don't like this. It's perfectly fine. You can go whatever way you want to go.
I think we're a little bit different, because I think first I'm tied to my positivity and then harmony. The moment I react, I'm not harmonious. So like I'm going against a lot of my own values.
And that's the thing. That's that's why the shadow self comes into the picture for you, because you're anti-disharmony, negativity. So then you don't give feedback about negative things without having to think a billion hours about it before you give feedback. No, I'm not saying a billion hours, but like you have to process it to an active level, and it makes it very hard for you to give a negative feedback to a person. So it's not as efficient as it could be. That's where the shadow self comes in, because you're not allowed to give a negative remark to a person, possibly. And so one part about teamwork, right? And Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team that I love. At the bottom of it is called trust. the ability to speak your mind as and when you disagree and have the negativity about it.
I have to think for a while
Okay.
how to say
In the
the
book-
feedback.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
when in the 5 dysfunctions of the team, when you talk about trust, I mean it's a dysfunction, right? So it talks about the absence of trust, right? And the trust that he talks about is basically a vulnerability-based trust. So there's predictive trust in the sense that I know what the person's going to do
Yes.
given a certain circumstance, and there's the vulnerability-based trust of
Yes.
that, oh, I can show my faults and my mistakes. That's kind of what Patrick Lencioni was
In the book, one of the major parts about this is the ability to speak up their discomfort about something and being vulnerable to be attacked by other people for expressing that unhappiness. In the book, so in the book itself, there was this one scenario by one of the characters. So that's why I remember it very clearly, because in the scenario, he played it out in that manner where if I disagree with the marketing manager, I should be able to speak my mind without disagreeing with him and just telling him that he's wrong, right? So I need to be able to tell him negative emotions that I feel uncomfortable with what he's doing without necessarily just blaming him. So that's the hard part, right? Like that's what the book was really talking about in the original when I was going through the book. And so that's why I always go back to this thing. If the ability for me to speak up negativity towards another person in the kindest way possible is my goal, not to speak positively. There's a difference, huh? So it's if I can tell a person their problem with the nicest and kindest format. Like for example, sometimes when I tell Ken, you didn't make sense there. I'm just always going to shoot Ken because he's, and I just tell him you didn't make sense there. But I do it in a kind way. It goes, can you please like reiterate again? Rather than tell him you stupid. I'm not going to say that because that's just judgment. That's just plain outright negativity. But if I can use a negativity of like, that didn't make sense to me, can you please reiterate that again? It's a very different way of saying it. But the thing is that when you're anti-negativity, you can't really speak that up at the exact moment. But I don't know about you. I'm just referring to that. Again, I've never had the issues with you before, like any issues where you give me negative feedback. So I don't know. But what I'll say is that there is the risk in the shadow self where we don't speak up what we believe should be done or said because we're anti something that stops us from being fully vulnerable, analyzing the situation objectively, or having options of expressing our ways of looking at things.
So I hear you, Ethan. I think I'll put it in another way to see it lah. So because based on what I digest so far and what I seem to get is like even my top 5, right, got input and responsibility. I like use responsibility because it's quite easy to understand lah. So in a way, because it forms my strength, I would also say that there's a mirror image of it.
Yes.
Right. I think that's what you're suggesting, right? In terms of that, when I'm, let's say, very low mood or very flustered or just very low mood lah, I tend to judge other people based on all this strength. Like people are not responsible, why people are not committed to hand in on the same timeline that I set out to do. And that's the thing. I guess what you're saying is that's the thing that we tend not to see, because that becomes the shadow self that was sort of formed there lah. So that's what I gathered so far lah, in terms of like what you're saying. There's the anti side of it, even though that is my current strength, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Like if a person who doesn't understand as fast as I do, I get irritated at them. I'm anti that and I suppress. Like if I don't understand something fast, I'll start getting angry at myself. Those are all shadow self.
Okay, so it sounds like okay, so for example, someone with adaptability might probably judge someone with discipline as being too rigid.
Yes.
Right? Because of the difference in the perspective. So typically in my strengths workshop, we just say that it's you have a different benchmark for different things, and therefore it irritates you, right? So if I talk about structure, the need for structure for discipline is really high, and the need for structure for adaptability is really low. Or the opposite, right? For flexibility is really high, and the other way around. So that's why when you put the two together, sometimes they can clash. Yes. And that's kind of how, in teams and workshops, to get people to understand and work with one another, recognizing differences and kind of really accepting them, right? So someone with adaptability then needs to accept that someone with discipline is different from me and needs more structure, and this is how I work with this person.
And that's exactly why I go back to this, where two parts start clashing with each other, right? Where if I'm anti, like, so for example, the disciplined person is anti-adaptability or anti-flexibility, anti-laissez-faire. But the adaptability person is like the whatever happens, I know how to manage it. Why are you so fixed about the way it should be done, right? And they keep clashing with each other. If you look at it, right, why can't the adaptable person want some structure to work with? And why can't the disciplined person be open to adaptability? Why are they not open to each other?
So that's the point, right? We talk about recognizing how your talent team show up, and then we talk about complementary partnerships.
Yes.
So we do recognize that, look, if I'm high adaptability, I might not be so good with structure. And therefore, I do find someone, where structure is required, to find someone to partner with so that we can provide more structure. It's the same like the way that three of us collaborate, right?
Yes.
So in terms of emergent ethics, my structural is not that high, but conceptual and all this is really much higher. And therefore we go to Jeffrey, and Jeffrey, please help us give some structure to kind of what we're doing. So there's this whole part of, I'm a bit cautious that when we start talking about talent teams and all this, not to, it almost sounds a bit negative already, the way that we frame it.
So, okay, I just want to say it, right? Like, mature people are able to activate this properly. So when we talk about mature, once your talent team matures, you're open to the other side of the equation. You're able to complement with other people. If you're immature, you're going to be judging other people as too rigid or too whatever. Then your talent team becomes your weak spot, because you become fixated down that path that this is the only way it's done. So talent teams within itself has no problems. It's how mature you are in accepting other ways of looking at things, right? Because when we look at maturity again, right? Like, so if I'm a strategic person, if I'm an individualization person and I meet a consistency person, right? And if I judge the person for treating everybody the same, that is me being immature and having a shadow self where I disallow myself to be fair, or whatever we want to look at it in the consistency way of looking at things. That means I am uncomfortable with looking for fairness. And I tell you this also because my sister is the ultimate person who is always using the word fair. And because she did that when I was young, my individualization became so strong because I was anti-fair.
Okay, sorry. What you just described is consistency and individualization, which is kind of a bit opposite.
But then I learned to mature about it. So I was anti people who are looking for fairness and justice, and everybody should be treated the same. Everybody should be treated the same way. Because for me, I believe in individualization because of my experience. And if I didn't mature, I would judge people with consistency.
So, Ita, I just want to put this across you. So what I'm hearing is like, because Shadow started by moving people into different parts, right? So which is why you may misunderstood, or you cannot see the value of what the other people bring, which is like what Alex pointed out, adaptability versus discipline, right? Yep. So when you are in that state, you tend to build a lot of boundaries that you are right and the other person is wrong. And I guess one way to integrate it, also coming because we understood strength, right? It's a way for us to understand, and that in itself help us to then integrate the value of both sides. So that's one point I see. Then the other part I also see is like the parts that we tend to get triggered more. We tend not to see the value of the other side. And that should indicate there is a possible shadow at work.
Yes.
So because to you, you may not see it, because once you hear the topic, you get triggered, either frustration and things. And that's probably a shadow at play lah. Yes. And maybe it doesn't appear the same way as maybe like Paylin see the situation, right? She injects positivity and she can see the value from both sides. So I guess then one way I'm at least getting out is whether how often I get triggered, that might be a way to recognize
Yes.
my possible shadow, because once I start not being able to empathize and see what the value the other parts bring, that might be a possible shadow because they're not integrated yet. And one way to integrate it is to, I mean, of course, after you to see the value in what the other parts bring. But that usually come after you rant or complain because you need some place to unload first. Then once you get clear-headed, you tend to be able to see the situation much clearer.
Exactly. So,
yeah.
I mean, we use the word situation more clearer, but the truth is you need to recognize you are judging the other person. It's not that facts is that this person is wrong. It's that you are having this judgment that what this person represents or does is wrong. Because you believe it's wrong, because you suppress that part of yourself, because your strength is on top. So, like, again, an empathetic person to Alex could have been if it was acting out with the shadow self, he might get super irritated with an empathetic person. But the irritation is a reflection of him not allowing himself to be apathetic.
That's the projecting part, right?
Yes.
Certain part whereby sometimes we say what we are most irritated by in other people is what we dislike most about ourselves.
Yes. And then through the renting and reflection and analysis, you start recognizing that, wait, I'm missing a perspective in this situation. And this is where like strengths comes in very useful, because it starts telling you, you need to pair with the opposite kind of person for you to complement with each other. Right? So the effectiveness of something like this gives a new perspectives for us to think about. Because the beauty of things like Enneagram, Strengths Finder, all these kind of things is that it gives us another way and another lens of looking at the way we look at ourselves and what we value. Am I making...
In a way, it's up to you to integrate different parts using a different language, right?
Absolutely. So and NLP, right? Parts integration.
Yeah. That's why I see because it became a different part because you can't acknowledge that it's a part of you.
Yes.
So the only way you can acknowledge that is it becomes you again by integrating it.
So if I get irritated with judgmental people, it means that I'm judging myself for being judgmental. If I'm irritated by apathetic people, it's because I'm irritated myself when I'm apathetic. If I'm judging unproductive people, it's also because I'm judging myself when I'm unproductive. And there is a shadow self of mine that I need to recognize that I'm judging other people with. Because a person who is not against unproductivity would never, within themselves, if they are allowed to be unproductive themselves. So if I'm allowed to be as negative as I want to be, right? I wouldn't judge another person for being negative.
I wonder. Okay,
So
so
what if the person is negative all the time?
yeah,
Like, all the time, then
And it's fine. So I will let
once
the
in
person
a
know.
while, I think it's understandable, but all the time negative.
Okay, so I have friends who are like this. They're always negative. Then I'll just sit down again. Why are you so negative actually? Can you tell me why you like to look at all these parts? And then what I do a lot for these people is, can you notice that you're being negative? Like, can you notice that you're very negative here? It's okay that you're negative. Would you like to look at it in a different manner? So I don't get irritated by them anymore. I used to be anti-negativity myself. So when a person starts, life sucks, then I'll be like, oh, wow, right? But at the end of the day, right, what I've learned a lot is that, okay, so this person is probably crying out for help, feeling off, but they don't know how to express it right. Their negativity is their expression of something. So then I try to figure out why and how. Then that changes my way of looking at them. But if I don't allow myself to be negative, I cannot allow another person to be negative. It's like how they say a fat doctor cannot tell another person to lose weight. Same thing, right? Like it's the same thing. Like by example, you need to be, living the example of the same thing, because if not, it doesn't have the impact on the person. There was this wonderful story of Gandhi where the mother came out to Gandhi and asked Gandhi to ask her son to stop eating so much sweets. So Ganesh said, come back to me in 1 month. And in the 1 month, he removed all sugar in his diet. And then when he sat down with the kid and went, you know, sugar is actually not good for you. And then the mom was like, why do you take 1 month to tell him that same statement? He's like, because at least now I can say it from my heart. And that makes a lot of difference in the way we show empathy and relate to other people. Our shadow self stops us from really relating and creating the right relationships with people who might have things that we cannot stand about ourselves. Like I was always asking this question when there's this particular guy that all my friends know I hate to the bone of me, right? And it took me 3 months to understand why. It's because he can twist and manipulate words in such a way that I cannot tolerate because I have that in me. And I don't like my manipulative self. And then only through accepting that part of myself do I recognize that actually I use it for good most of the time, which is, you know, trying to help people heal their traumas, manage their wounds, understand themselves, but it is still manipulation. It is still a form of twisting words. It's a witty way of looking at life. And that was exactly why I was judging him. The moment that happened and I accepted that by myself, I even forgot his name. He became a thorn in my eye and like super like something that stares me all the time every time I think about him to like, oh, I forgot about him. It became that much of a difference for me because my shadow self was acting up and triggering me every time I thought about something similar.
So you're saying true all the time or sometimes? That means if we don't like something about someone, it points to a part of ourselves that we haven't accepted. So is it like true all times or all the time? Okay.
It's all the time.
So there's no exception to the rule.
There's no exception to the rule. There's not a single exception to the rule.
Okay.
Which is why I say shadow self is not a problem. It's just what is.
No, we started talking about things like negativity. One thought came to mind, right? So there are some talent teams that appear negative, like deliberative and restorative, right? So restorative looks for problems but they're very motivated to fix it. Deliberative looks for potential downfalls, so that we have a safe way of getting to the other side. Right? They are the people who like identify all your landmines before you move. So you are safe. So there are certain talent teams that appear negative, but actually has a contribution, right? There's something that they bring. So when we talk about negativity also, the first thought that came to my mind was, okay, so is it possible that this negativity brings with it some positive impact, and hence talent teams, right? So when we look at talent teams, we can actually, coming back to perspectives, be able to see where the value and the different perspectives these people have. So that's one frame I had when we're talking about negative things, and I link it back to talent teams. The other thing was that there are, okay, so you talk about accepting certain things, right? As if everything we can accept. But are there certain things which are unhealthy that shouldn't be accepted?
No, everything is acceptable. It's just what kind of consequences you want. So here's the change in modality. So this is where this is actually the clincher that by right I should be like, this is the clincher in my opinion. You can do anything you want if you're willing to take the consequences. So for example, you can break all contact with everybody and ignore everybody and just rage at them and all this kind of stuff if you're willing to take the consequences. You just don't have no friends. You don't have friends. You don't have people you can turn to. When things go to shit, like go to crap, you wouldn't be able to have people you can fall back on. If you're willing to take the consequences, sure. At the end of the day, once we look at consequences almost aloofly, like where we're not looking at this is right, this is wrong. Once we look at it that way, it becomes, what life do I want to build?
Okay, let me use an example that I'm not sure whether the rest resonate, right? So one is, I think that people shouldn't be ungrateful. And it's something that I anti-ungrateful.
So
Yeah. So But there's certain thing that is like, it's like, is it acceptable? Oh, so maybe that's part of my shadow self, right? But how
Okay, so this is where I love this. I was anti-ungrateful for the longest time. I used to believe, so I've helped, now admittedly, on hindsight, I've learned that I helped hundreds of people in their lives. Because all my students in the past, all the people I've helped, all these kind of things, I've helped hundreds. I actually calculated, I was like, oh wow. You know how often I was looking at them going, ungrateful, 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 ungrateful. I spent so much time being ungrateful, ungrateful. I was hurting myself. You know what's my favorite part about this? It's not that they were not grateful. I had a specific way they had to be grateful towards me. I had a specific way in which they should behave. You know what's my favorite way that they actually have been grateful towards me? They passed it forward to the next person. So if I'm uncomfortable or unhappy that somebody's ungrateful to me, that might be on me. Because I might be looking for a way for them to be grateful. So, and then the other part about this is how anti-ungratefulness hurt me was whenever some con man used to help me. So this happened a number of times, and this happened I would say 6 times. 6 very clear times. I used to go fight tooth and nail for them because I had to be grateful. So they made use of me. They helped me once, I fought for them for the next 3 months and got myself really badly damaged in the process.
Okay, I need to process that. I noticed that we are out of time. It's 9:27. So what we've done is we've kind of put everything here on Miro. Who wraps up?
Jaffa, would you like to wrap up? Because
Okay.
maybe the host.
But Alex, you wrote everything, so on Miro. You can also wrap up, but I can do it now.
I'll try. Your add-on, because
Can.
kind of based on memory, right? Okay, we started with what our audience wanted to take away was in terms of understanding what the shadow aspects are, where they come from, self-awareness, and then how to manage it so that it doesn't cause self-sabotage, right? Then we went into, this was something that we built along the way on and off. So we talked about the shadow self, that it is something that is hidden, we're not proud of. It causes fixation and disallowance of certain behavior and things. And with it, we actually develop coping mechanisms, right? And the coping mechanisms is what help the shadow self to stay powerful. At the same time, when we start looking at coping mechanisms, we do notice that coping mechanisms can lead to talents, so patterns of behaving, right? In Clifton Strengths language. And diving deeper into it, we say that, look, if your talents are raw, it causes negative impact, which is actually part of your coping mechanism, and we call that weakness, right? In Clifton Strengths language, weakness is absence or misapplication of talent, skills, or knowledge that causes problems for yourself or others. Then at the same time, we come back to talents, and we look at, you're able to manage it in a mature way, right? Whereby you have choices, you know how to grow into, I use the term interdependence with other people, right? Complementary partnerships. Then, and able to use it while in the correct context, it becomes strengths. Interesting thing about talents also is that sometimes it can reflect what your anti-values are and things that you hide, which is also what we call your shadow self. And a way to kind of get past the shadow self is the ability to acknowledge what this shadow self is or this anti-value is, so that you have the ability to choose your behavior. So for example, being empathetic for people who have empathy like me, right? So that's kind of what we talked about. We did talk about possible ways to look at what the shadow self is, things that we are proud of, things that we hold very tightly as kind of our trophy. We talk about Enneagram type and talent teams, but I suspect not just these two, but personality types in
most
general.
psychometric tests can.
So most psychometric tests that kinds of give you some description would probably reveal certain parts of yourself that you don't like or refuse to see.
I can even use Belbin's team roles to actually do this as well, because I started recognizing how it works for me also.
Interesting that you mentioned we might be doing a session on Belbin's, because
very cool.
Okay, we did talk about self-sabotage, so whereby you have possibly like 2 shadow aspects of yourself that clashes, it causes a secondary reaction, and therefore you don't have a choice in the way that you react, and causes you to self-sabotage, right? And we did explore fairly deeply about the process to find and fix your shadow self. So we start off by renting, and renting, we need to have someone listening. It could be yourself, so you record yourself and listen, or you journal and you automatic write, or someone else to listen to you. Then you reflect, and it's important because you cannot reflect until you rent. And reflection is very useful when there are others around you, like a coach or a very perceptive wife in Jeff's case, able to come and tell you and reflect your behavior back to you, right? Then we can go into analyzing what it is, which helps us to generate new perspectives. And we talked a lot about Clifton Strengths in terms of how it can help you to see different perspectives of people, right? Especially if you start looking at what talent teams they might be manifesting, right? Or displaying at that point of time, to help you appreciate them a little bit, and also value them a little bit. But at the same time, I think it's also important when you talk about new perspective is to see for yourself, right? What it is that we don't want to see, or what is it we don't like or don't accept about ourselves. And I don't think we really talked about tests.
It's not a test, right? Like, so it's because no test can tell you your shadow self directly. It is from your strengths or your talents or what you like that you can tell what you don't like.
So I'm guessing testing is when the same situation happens again and how you react.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Test as the word. Sorry here. Sorry, my bad. So test is that this whole cycle repeats itself. You see whether you change the way you look at things.
Right.
So that's the best way of describing things. Whenever you test, it's always about, are you in real life? Are you still triggered by the same events? Are you still triggered by the same people? That's why I know I succeeded in accepting my shadow self when I forgot the guy's name. Because it started becoming a non-memory. Like it didn't become top of mind. So whenever I'm fixated on something, it's really because something's triggering me and I cannot stand it, right? That's my shadow self acting up. The best test is when it stops affecting you.
Cool. So that's my very quick 5-minute summary.
Yeah, it was good, very good.
And thank you. Learning to use Miro. So we're kind of experimenting with different ways to engage and get things together, right? So this is our latest and greatest move forward. So over to Jeffers.
So Alex, maybe because we haven't heard from everyone, and today's topic is really quite rich lah. There's a lot of things that are being covered. So I'm just curious, if you're okay, I just want you all to just share like
one round.
Just a round up, right? It's just a quick sharing. Maybe just like what's one thing that is clearer for you, and like what's one thing that's emerging for you. So what's one thing that's clearer for you after you hear this whole session, and actually what's one thing that's still emerging for you? Okay. So with that, then maybe I just invite each person to have just a quick sharing, just to get a sense. Always see Faith face first because she's smiling. So Faith, maybe can I invite you to go first? Is that okay?
Yeah. So one thing is clearer is the sense that the shadow self by itself is actually not harmful. It's more of the way we view it and whether we want to fix it. Then only would it actually cause us to self-sabotage or become a better person. Yeah. And we need to ourselves from disallowing ourselves to see reality, to protect ourselves from our negative behavior. And I think the emergent thing here is that I think as Ethan was talking about our talents, depending on the maturity, whether it's at the balcony or the basement, then it can actually reveal our shadow self. So I think back and then I see that I can see the correlation between that. And from that point, I think it's much easier for me to identify how to improve myself as a person. I mean, as in overall to fix my shadow self based on using my talents as a starting guide to understand myself better and through conversation.
Thanks, Faith. Paylin?
I think for me, it's really how if I don't like something about someone, it points to my shadow self. And it's 100% of the time. according to Ethan, right? There's no exception to the rule.
It's not an exception. It's never been an exception in my life. So every time I get irritated at somebody, I always go back, is it me? Is it me? It's always me.
Okay. True lah. There's some that means it means there's certain things that we're not accepting. That's why we get triggered, right? So if we have accepted that particular quality or trait, we shouldn't feel anything. It's like something that's the usual. It should be happening. Let's not be surprised by it.
Yeah. Apparently, anything that's emerging for you, like what's not so clear that at the moment that rises that needs something to think more, some more time to think about. It's okay if you don't have anything.
Yeah, can't think of anything for now. Nothing is emerging.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Justin.
Yeah, I think for myself, I'll just try to draw like the parallels to what is happening right now in my life as well. So most probably we'll be trying to use that rent thing to apply and see how I can make me more aware of what's going on in my shadow self, and also yes, trying to get out of that thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Justin. Ken.
One thing is definitely I know what is my shadow self. It surfaced just now when everyone is talking. So I guess that's about it for me for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Ken. Lillian, do you have anything notice that you might not be able to on your camera? If not, then you can just type in the chat box lah. Then maybe we can just chat. Okay, you got something to say, Lillian?
Yeah, I think for me, because I kind of came in halfway, so I'm still trying to follow. Yeah, but I think gathering like how shadow self is not something bad, but yet at the same, so I'm still trying to like, because I will still think that shadow self is like something that is hidden, right? So like, I don't know, I just see it as like, the doctor, I like the doctor like Jacob and so like there's a bad part and a good part, but yeah, so I'm still trying to like understand it. I think what was the takeaway was the part on the renting, like how like in order to reflect you need to rent first. And I think like what I shared last week, that I tend to rent a lot, but then people tell me, oh, like you shouldn't be renting or not. So I think that's the part whereby then I start to feel very uncomfortable about renting, or then I start to find very hard to reflect about things. So I think maybe through this, like it gives me a different perspective of like learning to rent, that like you need to lay it all out first, then you're able to actually reflect on it. Yeah.
Thanks, Lillian. I mean, what you reminded me, also what Ethan said, right? The renting in a space, in safe context where people can acknowledge you for who you are. Thank you. Alex, I mean, since you relate a lot to talent teams, you must have a lot of reflection on that.
That's a suggestion and a hypnotic induction. Okay, never mind. Terrible. Okay, I thought it's interesting in terms of the anti-values, because I want to be more cautious and conscious of how I'm looking for it. So I mean, like Lita was saying, right, when he was anti-ungratefulness, he was looking for how people were going to be grateful. So you actually spend energy looking for these things. And I suspect that part of it also comes back to how I relate to people, especially people who are very close to me, like my godsons and things like that, right? So that is kind of what's my takeaway and what's emerging for me, to be more aware of, is there something there that I'm looking for because it's empty? Maybe something that I'm not accepting in myself that I need to deal with. And then from there, hopefully that also snowballs, right, to other people and other relationships in my life that's important.
Thanks, Alex. Maybe I just share last. Ethan, you don't need, you talk a lot already today. So
if I can just do a summary. Just
okay, okay. Then I'll just share first, then you do a summary. So for me, I think is the very fact that everybody has shadow self. So we are normal. It's just that it affects us differently. And it shows up differently as well. And one way to tell it shows up is if you get triggered a lot in that and you're unable to see how you can connect or collaborate or have compassion, then it tends to be that trigger lah. So that's one thing that I find it to be true. Yeah, so that's the thing. Thanks. So over to you, Ethan.
All right, just to wrap this up very quickly. Thank you everybody for sharing your stories and understanding this in a different manner, because I think one of the biggest struggles I've always had was also explaining these concepts, because it's very counterintuitive to what our society tells us. Some people say use your demons to succeed, right? This is exactly how we create really corrupt people at the top, and use their shadow selves as weapons to threat other people. Whereas we're in a space right now that everybody's willing to gain self-awareness here, rather than using it as like a weapon, or like to power myself. There are people who are trying to gain success because they have a chip on their shoulder. We are trying to become more accepting and more compassionate people for all kinds of people. And I think that's the wonderful part that I hope that everybody at least feel a bit more towards a more whole self after to that. Because it's absolutely that the more we accept ourselves, the more we accept who we are, good, bad, ugly, everything inside, right? That we can be more compassionate towards ourselves and other people. And that's what I have to share.
Thanks, Ethan. So thanks, everyone. Alex, got any announcement?
No, we have sent the PDF from the mural to everyone in the chat. So do go download it. Because sometimes we try to figure out how to get these things to you all, right? So I can go there and download it. And I will see you all in the next session, 2 weeks time, where we'll be talking about
that's Jeff's topic, right?
Bringing your best self.
Bring your best self. We talk about performance.
Yeah, I think that round I'll be the mural person.
Okay, then I will be the host. And Jaffa can facilitate.
You can facilitate with me lah.
Can, no problem.
Yeah, you also strengths finder got talk about performance. Pei Ling also know about that. Pei Ling.
Yeah, we talk about performance all the time.
Yeah, we talk about performance. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do that. I'll see everyone in 2 weeks time.
See you guys.
See you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.
Question to Ethan.
Yes.
I mean, renting is good, but let's say you're renting to self, right?
Yeah.
Then your reflection only make agitate you move further. Because we can be an overthinker. Then how can it help us?
My favorite way of talking about this is why I record it and view it in a different space. So, for example, after I'm fully relaxed, like Jeffrey was saying, right? Once he's calm, when his wife tells him what happened, he's perfectly fine to take it. It's the same thing. You need to be in a different space. You cannot be in the same space. But if it still continues to trigger you, you need to bring it to somebody who can coach or to give that space for you to feel safe.
But if there's no willingness to step up and voice it to another, then how can one improve?
That's the problem then. Like if the person is not willing to face and is always getting triggered by their own selves, that loop can only be broken by an external person. And that's what I've keep experiencing. Until the person's willing to change, this will not change.
Yeah. So you're talking about doing for yourself or doing for someone else?
Sometimes it's self, sometimes it's I see in a friend.
Okay.
To the second person is more of like getting their perspective, like their ideas or like. So, but whether or not you agree on it doesn't matter, but it's just more being open to hear other people's perspective.
So you get a space of how you're looking at it differently from the other person, because then it's like, the idea of like a cube, right? You look at it from different angles, you get completely different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one thing that for those of you who are at least on the elite membership can go and try. We did that session on EFT recently, right? So start tapping.
Yeah, so actually EFT actually relieves the shadow self, but what happens is that you still need to replace it afterwards. So I've done a lot of EFT. So the replacement, you need to be aware in order for you to replace, which is why if you do EFT without having something to replace at the end, what happens is it can be a random thing that appears rather than a more holistic, mature version of yourself.
Right.
Just to
yeah. So that's why in that session we talked about 3 things, right? The trigger, the what was it? The to release. And the last one was rewire, I remember. I can't remember the second one. Second one was kind of like clearing it, right? Getting rid of the negative emotions. So for those of you who are keen, go watch it. So Faith, I know you definitely have access. Go look at it. And just have fun with it.
That
Yeah.
one was good. I tried. After that, I tried a bit more times.
I've been doing it for about 6 years. So it's very
Tried it
easy.
on your own after that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about session. I will be happy to watch the video and can see what I can help.
Supposed to join us, but you didn't. Okay.
I was busy lah.
Yeah. Don't worry, I accept you.
I have this to run, I have this to run.
I accept you. Don't worry. I'm not anti. Okay, never mind. Whatever it is.
Anti non-appearance.
Yeah. Okay, so
I accept you.
yeah. Okay, so 2 weeks time, see you at Quick Connect Live. Check out the EFT Quick Connect. Sorry.
For the elite members.
Check out the EFT talent showcase session that's on the site, and I think you'll find it very, very interesting. Okay, see you guys.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
take care.
Bye.